Welcome to Maraxo's Reviews and How-Tos. My name is Brian. I hope that you guys enjoyed that build footage that you just saw. As we get this video started, I'd like to say thank you for checking out my $500 PC video, as I know there are a myriad of other videos out there to choose from. Since I first had the idea for this video, my plans have changed for it a bit. Initially, I figured I'd build the PC, then do CPU and gaming benchmarks, and just present a bunch of hard numbers. But then as I began using this PC and thinking more about it, my feelings for what I wanted this video to be changed. The reason I built this PC in the first place is because I wanted to see what kind of gaming experience you can have on a $500 budget. The impression that I get from a lot of the tech channels I subscribe to, and what I perceive to be the general consensus among many members of the PC gaming community out there, is that in order to have a good gaming experience on PC, you need to spend at least $1,000 on your rig. Over the past year or so, however, I have come to disagree with this mindset. From the statistics I've seen, the vast majority of people out there right now are gaming on 1080p 60Hz displays. There was a time that gaming at 1080p 60 FPS required very expensive high-end hardware. However, those days are long gone, and gaming at that resolution and refresh rate is much more affordable now. There are a lot of people out there, just like you, that are eager to get into the PC gaming world, but can't really afford to drop $1,000+ US on a rig. What I've decided to do with this video is, rather than show you a bunch of numbers that when compared to a $1,000+ PC aren't really going to impress anybody, is to instead use this computer for its intended use. Play some games, and let you see what gaming on it is actually like, and let you be the judge on whether it's good or not. So, without further ado, let's introduce you to what we've got going on under the hood of this little guy back here. For our CPU, I chose the Ryzen 3 1200. It's a quad-core CPU, and I was able to pick it up for about $100 on Newegg.com during Black Friday in November. It has a base clock of 3.1 gigahertz and boosts up to 3.4 gigahertz out of the box, but I was able to very easily overclock it to 3.8 gigahertz. For our motherboard, we've got the MSI B350 Gaming Pro M. I got the R3 1200 and this motherboard in a combo, and for what I paid for this board, I feel that you'd be hard-pressed to find another board out there currently that costs this little and looks this good. For RAM, I picked up 8 gigabytes of G.Skill Ripjaws V DDR4 clocked at 3066 megahertz. For storage, I chose to go with a 240 gigabyte Team Group SSD in order to get that snappy user experience and quick boot times that SSDs offer. If you happen to have an old hard drive you can steal out of your current rig that you can use for mass storage, then I totally recommend doing that and do what I'm doing here and use an SSD as your boot drive. If you don't have an old mechanical hard drive you can reuse, and if buying an SSD and a separate mass storage drive doesn't fit in your budget, then you'll probably want to pass on the SSD and just get a 1 or 2 terabyte mechanical drive and install your operating system onto it. The Cooler Master Masterbox Lite 3.1 is the case I chose to use because, in my opinion, it's a good looking case, and because when I bought it, it was on sale for $35 and had a $15 mail-in rebate. I mean, this case for $20, I just couldn't pass it up. This case does only come with a single exhaust fan, however, so I had to purchase the front fan separately, but I was able to pick up these Cooler Master Sickle Flow red LED fans for about $15 for the pair. Powering our rig is the Corsair CX550 power supply with all black cables, that's important. It's a bit more power than this rig really needs, but it does allow some headroom for upgrading the CPU and GPU in the future. It also had a $20 mail-in rebate, so in the end it only cost me 30 bucks, and like the case, I just couldn't pass that deal up. Now it's time for the part of the build that I'm sure you are the most curious about, the GPU. The graphics card I chose is the PowerColor Radeon RX 560, 4GB. This is the 14 compute unit 896 stream processor model that a lot of people have been hating on recently because AMD started selling these right alongside a 16 compute unit 1024 stream processor model and didn't inform consumers they were doing this. Anyway, even though it's a slightly less powerful variant of the RX 560 and isn't as desirable to some folks as the other model, if you're currently building a PC on a $500 budget, this model of the RX 560 is quite frankly one of your options. Honestly, I'm curious to see what this version of the GPU can do. This card currently retails for $125 US. I picked it up on sale the week of Black Friday for $100, and it had a $20 mail-in rebate to boot, so having essentially only paid $80 for this card, I can't complain. Now, I'm sure there are some of you out there that are saying I should have gotten a better GPU like a GTX 1050 Ti, but in order for a more expensive GPU to fit in my $500 budget, I would have had to make some compromises to the aesthetics of the build by going with a less expensive motherboard, RAM, case, and power supply or something. And I didn't just want this PC to play games. I wanted it to look good too, so I decided to sacrifice a little GPU performance to add a little more visual sex appeal. If you happen to be interested in purchasing any of the parts I've used in this build, I have placed links to everything on Amazon as well as on Newegg.com in the video description. Now that we've got our system specs all covered, let's put this little guy through his paces and see just what he can do. Our first game in our lineup today is Starcraft 2. It's a very popular real-time strategy game, one that I personally really enjoy playing. As of the making of this video, it's a 7-year-old game, and this build was able to run it at ultra settings at 1080p right up around 50 FPS. During big battles, the frame rate did drop down into the 20s, as you can most certainly see here, but I feel that real-time strategy games like Starcraft 2 can have the frame rate dip down like this without it affecting gameplay all that much. Somebody else, I'm sure, will have a differing opinion on this, but in my opinion, this was still very playable on ultra settings. A newer game I've had some fun with from just last year, 2017, is Doom. AMD's Polaris architecture is very good with games using the Vulkan API, and Doom is one of the few games that currently uses Vulkan. Putting the game on the Ultra preset, we were able to play at right up around 60 FPS with no problem at all. There were times when the frame rate would dip down into the 50s, but during actual gameplay this was imperceptible to me, and the game felt fast and smooth. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colosus is another game published by Bethesda that also runs using the Vulkan API, and like Doom, we were able to achieve a much higher frame rate at ultra settings than I thought that I'd be able to. Quite often we were able to stay above 60 FPS, however in action-packed areas of the game the frame rate would very often dip down below 60 and sometimes even into the 30s. I'm not entirely sure if this is due to a limitation of the GPU itself or if I just don't have enough system memory. Looking at the statistics in MSI Afterburner, it showed I was using all 4 GB of VRAM on the RX 560 as well as over 6 GB of system memory when using the Ultra preset. Even when I turned things down to high, I was still seeing the same result. I believe Windows reserves 2 GB of RAM for it to run, meaning there's only 6 GB left for other applications like games to utilize, and once it gets maxed out, frame rates in games are adversely affected. Dialing things down to the medium preset, the frame rate got much better, as we no longer seem to be RAM limited. Even on medium, the game looks really good, so my eye candy fetish was still being satisfyingly met. Running into this issue does make me wish I had 16 GB of DDR4 laying around that I could throw in and test to see if having more system memory would make a difference, as I have a feeling that it very well could. Titanfall 2 is now a little over a year old and I don't know how many people there are still playing it, but it's a game that I've really enjoyed playing, so I decided I'd include it in the video. On very high settings, the game ranged from the 40s up into the 90s, but turning things down to high helped get rid of the sub 60 FPS dips and allowed for a very nice gameplay experience, if I do say so myself. Moving on to a much more recent title, Epic Games' Fortnite is a battle royale style game that is currently enjoying quite a bit of popularity. I personally have been having a lot of fun playing it, and I'm probably going to catch some flack for saying this, but in my opinion, it's a much better game than PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which we will also be taking a look at a little later on in this video. To get a frame rate that was constantly above 60 FPS at 1080p, I had to resort to a mixed bag of high and medium settings. Turning the shadows off and anti-aliasing on medium with everything else on epic actually got me a fairly playable frame rate in the 40s and 50s. Just for kicks, I decided to try playing Fortnite on an HP laptop my wife and I bought 2 or 3 years ago or so for $600. And for the game to even be somewhat playable, and by somewhat playable, I mean around 30 FPS, I had to put the resolution at 480p with all the graphical settings on low. Looks good, doesn't it? Rise of the Tomb Raider is one of the few games that I own that has DirectX 12 support, so I threw it in here for that reason. To get over 60 FPS, I had to turn the graphical settings down to lowest, but I like my eye candy, and Rise of the Tomb Raider isn't a fast-paced competitive online shooter or anything, so I cranked it up to medium and then to high to see how things would go. In my opinion, there isn't much of a difference in the visuals in this game when going between high and medium. I mean, there is a difference, it's just very slight, however, and even at medium settings, I think the game still looks really good. It stayed above 30 FPS on both medium and high settings, usually averaging in the 40s, but even though the frame rate was similar, to me, the game felt noticeably smoother at medium than at high. There seemed to me to be a lot less artifacts and other visual glitches, which I'm sure contributed to it feeling smoother on medium. Grand Theft Auto V. Although being 3 years old now on PC, it is still a very popular title, so I of course needed to see how my $500 rig handles it. I must confess that I've never actually played GTA 5. My cousin let me borrow his game so I could test it out on the system, and as demanding as I've heard this game is, I was kind of surprised to see that this little $500 build was easily able to maintain well above 60 FPS through the game's built-in benchmark, as well as in normal gameplay. And for being a game that came out on consoles first like 4 years ago, this game looks really good and plays incredibly well on this rig. Finally, we have PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, aka PUBG. This game is insanely popular right now, so even though I personally enjoy the gameplay in Fortnite better, I'm sure there are many of you watching this right now that are wanting to know if a $500 build like mine here can get you in on the fun. With as well as this rig has fared on all the other titles I've tested, I was feeling pretty optimistic going into this test. However, the performance numbers I was seeing on this title left me a little bit baffled at first. It seems that no matter what settings I played PUBG at, from high all the way down to very low, I'm getting more or less the exact same frame rate. Checking the performance metrics in MSI Afterburner revealed that I was seeing the same RAM issue I ran into in Wolfenstein at high and ultra settings. All 4 GB of VRAM on the graphics card was being fully utilized, as well as over 6 GB of system memory. In Wolfenstein, turning the settings down fixed this problem and got us back up over 60 FPS consistently. However, in PUBG, no matter how low I turned down the settings, it would never run much higher than 50 FPS, and most of the time was averaging in the 40s. The game was still playable at this frame rate, but when you're playing a competitive online shooter, being at 60 FPS and above does provide the smoothest experience. Overall, I am very impressed with the performance of this build. I did not expect the RX 580 to perform as well as it did in the newer games I tested. Other than PUBG, it played every game at 1080p very well. Sure, I had to turn the settings down on some of the games, but even when I was forced to resort to medium settings, I felt the graphics quality was still really good. And on the games that I wasn't really able to achieve 60 FPS in, the frame rates were within what I consider to be the playable range. I'd love to have been able to put 16 gigabytes of RAM into this guy and see how much of a difference it makes, if any, but with DDR4 memory prices being nearly double what they were a year ago, it just didn't fit into the budget. If you're currently looking to build a system like this one, I totally recommend getting 16 gigabytes rather than 8 if you can afford it. As you saw in this video, both Wolfenstein and PUBG, I feel, could benefit significantly from having more RAM, and I think going forward, the number of games requiring higher amounts of RAM is only going to increase. Even though this isn't the most powerful PC I could have built at this price point, I feel that when it comes to looks and performance, this build is in nearly perfect balance. This video has been a lot of fun for me to make. I hope you've enjoyed watching it and it's helped you see that you can have a really good gaming experience on a $500 budget. Please hit that thumbs up button on your way out if you've enjoyed the video. If you have any questions for me, leave them in the comment section below and I will do my very best to get back to you there. If you'd like to see more videos like this one and you are not yet subscribed to my channel, you can click that subscribe button for the low price of only $0 per month. As always, thanks so much for taking some time to hang out with me today and watch this video. I hope that you have yourself a fantastic day and I look forward to hanging out with you again next time. Later.